Hello, bruv. These are the books I bought at John King today. This one is an old classic, The Werewolf of Grosse Pointe by Gundella the Witch. I have a copy of this that I found full 10 cents at the Redford Salvation Army before it closed. I believe it was published in 1976. Yes. By Earsight Products, Detroit. It's basically a bunch of ghost stories. I'm not going to open this too far because I don't want to wreck the spine. The spine is gently. I mean, the whole thing is gently rubbed. Looks like it's brand new. I don't know if Mr. King bought an entire box of these or something, but if another one should appear, I will know. This book comprises much of what her last book, Michigan Haunts and Hauntings, where she used her actual name, Marion Kuklo, instead of her witch name, Gundella. And that's basically it. That was a revised edition of this with additional stories. The introduction is by Marcello Truzzi, who was a professor at University of Michigan, Eastern Michigan University, and New College in, I think, Sarasota is where it was. And he was the one who found Gundella and wrote to her. And they met and became friends. And he was a skeptic, but very interested in witchcraft and the occult. He was friends with Anton LaVey, I believe Sybil Leek, obviously Gundella. And he brought her to regional prominence, especially in Detroit. But since he had family in Florida where they were circus entertainers, I believe his father's name was Maximilio or something like that, Truzzi. And they were pretty renowned circus people. And Truzzi actually wrote and studied the circus for some years. And then he turned to the occult. Well, he was a sociology professor of some renown, but I'm not sure if he ever came across witchcraft and sociology. You'd have to assume he did, and that's how he got into it, but you never know. It could have just been the sociological aspects of the late 60s where it arose, and he became interested in it. No matter, they were friends, and that's that. The history of the 24th Michigan of Iron Brigade. This is an original copy from 1891, but it's been rebound, which is unfortunate, but I mean, what are you going to do? Normally, they wouldn't have this. I think they considered it, what's this called? Just general boards. I think it had a buckram binding. But it is what it is. I got this for obvious reasons that Orson Blair Curtis, he spelled his name. His name is spelled with two S's, but for some reason in his private life, he went by the one S spelling. He grew up about 2 blocks away from where I live, and it is part of the Unistrut Corporation. That's where the property was, where this house lie. I think they used it for an office for some years before finally tearing it down about 50, 60 years ago, whenever. As you can see, there's a nameplate. For Dr. James Carraway, who happened to be the one of the two founders of the Nankin Hospital, which was basically at Wayne Road and Michigan Avenue west of Elizabeth Street. Actually, it was Elizabeth and Michigan Avenue west, and it was located west of Elizabeth Street, which would have been Sophia Street back then in the 20s or 30s, whenever they founded. I think it was the 30s. Eventually, the place was condemned. It turned into the Nankin Clinic, I think, or the Wayne Clinic, one of the two, since it was in Wayne. And Carraway signed it and bequeathed it to somebody, though he doesn't say who, which is unfortunate. But he does say to a younger history, either a lover or to a younger history lower. I assume he means lover, and it got cut off. I don't know why the hell he signed it so close to there, but maybe Jimmy was getting old. The book plate is 49, and this is signed 1965, so 58 years ago and 74 years ago. So I don't know if he only owned it for 6 years, but that's that. And I've been told, or I've read, that he was one of the original founders of the Wayne Historical Society, which is where this book shall go when I croak. There's an interesting part in here about the riots in Detroit. I can't remember which year it was, 1860 something. Uprising in Detroit, and when they were going to have a draft for the Civil War. And Eber Brock Ward was one of the ralliers of the gathering that was trying to get men conscripted. And there he is, Captain Eber Brock Ward, industrialist, sailor, ship magnate. And eventually he was speaking at this rally at Campus Martius Park, and it turned violent, and they were threatening to kill him and another man, but they ran into one of the hotels, the Fuller or something like that. I can't remember which one it was, and it doesn't really matter because it's well documented history. Raising the regiment. Also, Mr. Orson Blair Curtis was the son of, I think, Stephen Turney Curtis, and his brother, whose name is escaping me now. What was his name? Regardless, the father and the son, maybe it was Stephen. No, that was Stephen Turney Curtis, and maybe that's why he changed his name to Curtis with one S, to remove himself from their company, their bad reputation, as they were doubly tried and exonerated for grave robbing at William Ganong Cemetery. They were caught in the act by a man named Hugh Austin and Orange Butler, who waited until they had grabbed the body and heaved it over the fence to put it on a cart, a carriage, horse-drawn carriage, and then they sprung upon them with guns and threatened to kill them. And obviously, Hugh Austin, who lived and owned the property next to Eloise, was well aware of who the younger Curtis was, as he was a doctor. And I believe he was affiliated with the University of Michigan, and that's why he was stealing the body so they could use it for the medical college. But they were caught and exonerated twice. Stanislas, I can't even say his name, Stanislas Keenan, who was many things at Eloise, including postmaster and inventor, mycologist, and the historian. I think he was the bookkeeper as well. This guy literally did everything there. He wrote in the History of Eloise in 1913, perhaps, maybe 12, that it was common for the medical colleges to steal corpses from both the pauper grounds that were on Henry Ruff, which I believe was called, what was it called? No. Can't remember what the road was called then, but I think it was still Henry Ruff. No, it wasn't Henry Ruff. It was another name, which escapes me. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And Keenan all but laughed about the numerous grave robbings, which was kind of morbid, but he openly wrote about it and said that the bodies were taken, and it was a known fact that they were taken, and it was kind of common knowledge that nobody really gave two shits. But Hugh Austin and Orange Butler apparently were friends with David or Daniel Randall. The newspaper accounts vary because the Free Press was full of factual errors of all sorts, and they never got the story right, but it was one of those two names. And since there's no recorded history of either Randall being buried at Ganong, of course, the Free Press, I stumbled upon the story by mistake. It was spelled G-O-N-G-O-N-O-N-G-U-E, Ganong, which is why I call it Gianonge. But I'm prattling. Mr. Curtis lost one of his arms in the Civil War, fighting for the 24th Michigan, which is why he has such an intimate history of their endeavors. He was part of the battles. I don't recall which battle he lost it in, but could have been Gettysburg, could have been any of them. There's a later monument to the 24th. This is one of the most renowned personal histories of any battalion. I'm not sure what the precise name for Civil War battalions and whatever they are. I'm not a big fan of war history, though it's necessary, I suppose. And his is one of the better. It would be interesting to know which arm he lost and which was his primary arm for writing. So I know he was a clerk, customs clerk for the United States at the Canadian border. So if he was right-handed and lost his right hand, he obviously learned to use his other arm. But I'm assuming that since they didn't mention it, that he lost his, what would you call it, secondary arm. He was wounded and it didn't heal, and they eventually had to saw it off. Amputation. What else? He was a teacher for a while in Wayne, and then he became, I think, well, besides the border thing, he may have been a professor or a principal at schools for a while, but I know he was definitely a teacher at the one of the schools in Wayne in his early career. His son later became a noted astronomer. I believe when I was reading his biography that he was a Methodist, strict Methodist, which means, I don't know what it means, but he didn't allow dancing, or I don't think the music of the time, and only wanted his children to have good books. Good books. So yeah, Curtis is an interesting guy. One-armed man. He died rather young. He was only 59, I believe. And that's about all I know about him. There's a couple stories I know about him, but I'm saving them for my newspaper. So yeah, I mean, I wish I could have got wish he would have had a less generic Ex Libris bookplate. But he didn't. Although, I don't know if I've ever seen this one, but it does look like I mean, I guess he could have had it printed up personally, but I don't think so. And it would have been nice to have the original cover, but like I said, the fact that Carraway owned it is important, since he was a historical figure in Wayne Village through much of the 1900s, the middle section of, obviously, but the 30s to at least the 60s. I'm assuming he died in 70. I have not been able to find out when he died. I know Curtis died in 1901, rather young. So what was that, 1901? 1890, say 94 or 91. So he died basically 10 years after he wrote this book. And when it first was published, I found a newspaper article in the Plymouth Mail from whatever year it was. Was it 1899? Couldn't have been. It must have been 1891. That said he would ship it for free for the grand sum of $2, which equates to about $67 in our time. So the book was not cheap. I don't know if he raised funds with it for the men of the regiments or not. But that's it. That's all I know. And I'm not a particular Civil War buff, and I don't really care about the Civil War, honestly. I mean, I don't not care, but I only care as it pertains to what I'm researching, and I'm not going to be one of the millions who go into it because it's been well researched, and I'm not about to research it. Though I will get around to reading this book for the sake of not necessarily reviewing it, but including it in my newspaper. Hopefully there's more incidentals about Curtis in here. I don't know why you want to keep calling them Orson Welles, other than the fact they both have the name Orson. And that's all.